This is an Okie Doke production.
Warning. The mighty Filbert is a wicked, deplorable man who is a horrible influence on children and most household pets. He curses like a sailor, smokes like a chimney, and has impure thoughts about anime characters. If you choose to continue watching or listening to this program, just remember, I warned you.
Buck v. Bell. It's a story of injustice. It's a story of the rise of the eugenics movement and its enduring legacy in law and society. And this case isn't just history. Its repercussions are felt even today. Buck v. Bell teaches us about the dangers of pseudoscience, unchecked power, and the importance of human rights. So let's go ahead and get into it.
If you want to turn the channel, go ahead, fool, turn the channel. If you want to learn something about God, shut your mouth and listen to me for a minute.
It's not fake, it's faith. We've seen midgets grow. We've seen arms and legs that stop growing because of growth cells that stop. Manda basata. I don't make this stuff up.
The word of God is his spur. The job of the preacher is to bring fresh spur.
We say.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion.
We're going to be talking about the Buck v. Bell case and the eugenics movement of the early 20th century. To kind of get some background on that, we need to go back to that time period, the early 20th century, when eugenics was gaining traction worldwide. Now, if you don't know what eugenics is, it was the pseudoscientific belief that we could improve human populations through selective breeding. Now, this idea of eugenics was influenced by the work of Sir Francis Galton. He was a British scientist, he was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he believed that selective breeding could enhance human traits in the same way it had improved domesticated animals. Galton's theories found fertile ground in the United States, and this is where they merged with existing prejudices about race, class, and disability. Prominent figures like President Theodore Roosevelt endorsed these ideas. He even once stated, society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Pretty nice, huh? Politicians, scientists, and social reformers saw eugenics as a way to address societal issues like poverty and crime by controlling who could and couldn't have children. Now, these ideas were further bolstered by economic fears and a desire to maintain racial and social hierarchies. Public opinion in the United States was not monolithic. Many Americans viewed eugenics and sterilization as progressive ideas. Influenced by the promise of a better society, these measures were seen as modern solutions to complex social problems. Public support for eugenics was fueled by exhibitions, pamphlets, and academic endorsements that presented sterilization as humane and scientifically sound. County fairs even hosted fitter family contests celebrating these so-called ideal genetics. Religious institutions also played a role. Many Protestant churches, influenced by the social gospel movement, supported eugenics as a means of promoting societal well-being. They saw sterilization as a tool for addressing poverty, criminality, and other perceived social ills. Clergy often preached about the moral obligation to prevent the propagation of undesirable traits. They framed eugenics as being aligned with Christian duty. For example, Reverend Walter Sumner, who was a leading Episcopal figure, argued that eugenics is the foundation of national efficiency, aligning it with Christian stewardship. The social gospel movement, which emphasized social justice and improving living conditions, often saw eugenics as part of its broader mission to uplift society. The feminist movement at the time had a complex relationship with eugenics. Some feminists saw eugenics as a way to empower women by giving them control over reproduction, although this perspective often ignored the coercive and discriminatory aspects of the movement, and I think that would have made a difference. I don't think a lot of them realized that, and maybe it was that they ignored them. I got to consider the people at the time. But I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe they didn't know that this wasn't the woman's choice. All right, these sterilizations were happening without consent, without even the knowledge of the patient. Margaret Sanger, who was a prominent advocate for birth control and the founder of what would become Planned Parenthood, supported eugenics. Well, at least to some extent. She believed that birth control could help improve societal health by preventing the birth of children into impoverished and unhealthy conditions. However, Sanger's alignment with eugenic rhetoric has been the subject of ongoing controversy, as it overshadowed the broader reproductive rights agenda she championed. Once again, I want to believe that she didn't understand or wasn't aware of the fact that these women were not doing this of their own free will. Now, it's into this scene where Carrie Buck comes on the case. Now, she was a young woman who was born into poverty in Charlottesville, Virginia, and she became the focal point of this movement. Her story is one of systemic failure and exploitation. After her mother, Emma Buck, was institutionalized for being immoral, Carrie was placed in foster care. And the name of this family was Dobbs. And these people treated her like crap. All right. They allowed her to attend school until the end of the 5th grade. She got a 5th grade education because they pulled her out of school. She didn't flunk out. She wasn't having problems comprehending the material, anything like that. They pulled her out. Why? So that she could clean their house and do their chores at home. Also because they wanted to basically rent her out to the neighbors and friends in the community to clean their houses for them and make them a little extra money on the side. And so they pulled her out of school at the end of 5th grade. And the thing was, her teachers at the time and people who knew her said that she understood the material. She was an average student. She wasn't, honor roll all the time, but she wasn't behind either. She was right there in the middle. She was an average student. No problems at all. She was not held back in any grade. She wouldn't have had any problems going forward. Okay? But these people here had a problem with her, and this happened at the age of 17. Because at the age of 17, she became pregnant after being assaulted by her foster nephew. Now, instead of protecting Carrie or seeking justice, the Dobbs family declared her feeble-minded and had her institutionalized at the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded. And that's what they said. They said, well, she's epileptic, even though no one in her life ever saw her have a seizure before this time or even later in her life. Never had any kind of problems at all with epilepsy. She didn't have it. And said that she was feeble-minded, even though, like I said, she was an average student. She didn't have any problems understanding what was being taught to her in school. So they have her institutionalized at this Virginia State Colony because they're figuring, well, we'll put her there. She won't be able to talk about what really happened to her, involving their nephew. And also, even if she did say something, well, we've already had her declared feeble-minded. So no one's going to listen to what she has to say anyway. They're not going to take her seriously. So what exactly was it that made someone feeble-minded in the eyes of the law and society? Well, this term was a catch-all label for individuals who were deemed intellectually or morally deficient. So this could include people with actual cognitive disabilities, but it was often applied far more broadly to encompass those who were simply poor or uneducated or socially nonconforming. Behaviors such as promiscuity, criminal activity, or even just being unmarried and pregnant could lead to this designation. The criteria were deeply subjective and steeped in prejudice, allowing authorities to target marginalized groups under the guise of public health. Once institutionalized, Carrie was caught in the web of Virginia's new sterilization law, which targeted individuals deemed unfit to procreate. And she came along at just the right time, because when she came along, the hospital there was looking for a case that they could get all the way up to the Supreme Court to set a precedence for what they wanted to do. And that's exactly what happened with her. She became this test case for the state's eugenics agenda. They wanted her to go in, be found guilty of being feeble-minded an epileptic, and then they wanted to help her so she could appeal that decision and keep appealing, every decision that went against her, to keep appealing until she finally got to the Supreme Court. All right, because then they thought not only would this help our state, but then this could be something that could be used by other states as well. So that's what happened with her in this case. She came here just at the time this was going on. And what made her perfect for this was because, as I said earlier, her mother, Emma, had already been institutionalized in this very same hospital for being feeble-minded. And that was because she was accused of being a prostitute. When in reality, at that time, just loitering somewhere, a woman by herself could be arrested for prostitution, whether she was actually with a John or not. Okay, so that's kind of what happened with Emma. So she was brought in here, and then, Carrie was her daughter, and then Carrie, she had her baby, and her baby, she named her Vivian, and she was an example of feeble-mindedness being passed from mother to daughter and to the daughter's daughter, to the granddaughter. All right. So this was a perfect case for them. This is exactly what they wanted. And they quickly were able to declare Vivian, Carrie's daughter, as feeble-minded as well, even though she was only like 7 months old when this happened. But when they tested her, I don't know what kind of test you give to a 6 or 7 month old baby, but they did, and they determined her to also be feeble-minded. And so that's what happened. So they thought this is going to be the perfect case to take before, to get all the way up to the Supreme Court. Once she was institutionalized, they made her the focal point of this test case they wanted to do. And the officials there were using this example, as I said, Emma, then Carrie, then Vivian, saying that they were all examples of hereditary imbecility. However, these labels were based on flimsy or fabricated evidence. As I said, Vivian was only like 7 months old and was declared feeble-minded. As I said, I don't know what kind of test they did, but there was nothing credible, nothing that had ever been used with the infants, at this age. So at the time, Virginia had just passed this law allowing the sterilization of individuals, as I said, that were deemed unfit to procreate. So Carrie's case was framed as a public health measure, but in reality, it was just an act of control over marginalized communities. Poor women, people with disabilities, and those on the fringes of society became the primary targets. So in 1927, Buck v. Bell reached the Supreme Court. Now, it was called that because the doctor, by the time this got to the Supreme Court, his last name was Bell, and so he was the one representing the interests of the hospital there, of the colony. So Virginia argued that sterilizing individuals like Carrie was a way to protect society from inherited defects. Now, on the other hand, Carrie's defense team argued that the law violated her constitutional rights. But here's the thing, and this, even before it reached the Supreme Court, from the very first trial and even when it finally got to the Supreme Court, Carrie wasn't really sure what was going on. She knew they wanted to do some kind of operation on her. They didn't tell her they were wanting to sterilize her. Okay? She didn't understand. So when she was asked for a comment at her first trial, she just said, well, I'll just let my people speak for me. They know best. So she wasn't told what any of this was about. Nothing was explained to her. Just that they wanted to do some kind of operation, and apparently there was a law in Virginia that wasn't allowing it, and they said this was something that could help her, that would be for her good. And so she was like, okay, fine. So whatever it was they told her they were going to do, it wasn't sterilization. They didn't tell that to her. And so she went through all three of these cases not understanding what this was even about. She thought it was something different. Okay? And she was given a defense attorney who barely brought any evidence at all. Didn't really argue on her behalf. As a matter of fact, in one of the trials, he testified against her. I mean, it was just she was railroaded from the beginning. They didn't call any of the teachers who could have verified that she was an average student. You know, that she had no problem communicating, no problem comprehending. You know, she was an average student. She was fine. She would have went on to the 6th grade. They didn't call any of them. They didn't call other people who knew her and the people that she worked for, cleaning their homes or whatever, who could have testified that no, she had common sense. She was not feeble-minded. They didn't call any of these people. They didn't call experts who could have tested her in their own way. They didn't call experts to challenge the testing and things that they did to deem her feeble-minded in the first place. They didn't talk about the fact that there was no evidence that she was epileptic. All right? None of this went on. She was given basically no defense at all. So when this got to the Supreme Court, it was the same story, same old song and dance. And she went before the Supreme Court, and Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. delivered the majority opinion. Now, everybody knows about Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. He's very well respected in law, in the history of law. I mean, he's at the top. Very well respected. But he was very much against people like Carrie. He was very much in favor of eugenics and sterilizing those that he didn't feel had the right to procreate. And so he delivers his opinion, and in it, he uttered some very now infamous words. This is what he said in his ruling. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Now, this decision not only upheld Virginia's sterilization law, but it also set a precedent that legitimized eugenics policies across the United States, and that's exactly what happened. Within months, 18 other states had already adopted eugenics laws for their state, sterilization laws. But as I said, her case was just riddled with injustice. Evidence was fabricated, and like I said, experts who could have challenged everything they were saying about her were never called. Because the court wasn't interested in protecting Carrie's rights. It was more concerned with endorsing this social experiment. And the consequences of Buck v. Bell were devastating. Over 60,000 forced sterilizations occurred in the United States under laws inspired by this decision. The laws targeted poor women, people of color, individuals with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. Internationally, Buck v. Bell became a model for eugenics policies in Nazi Germany. And as a matter of fact, during the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis on trial there explicitly cited the case as justification for their own sterilization programs, which eventually escalated to what? Genocide. So we had like 60 to 70,000 forced sterilizations in the U.S. Germany took that number up to over 350,000 forced sterilizations. All right, and like I said, they cited Buck v. Bell as, their premise for what they were doing. So I remember the movie Nuremberg. I don't know if you ever saw that. It had Spencer Tracy and Richard Widmark in it. And they showed that scene in the movie where the defense attorney cites Buck v. Bell to the court. Says, we're not doing anything different than what you did. So it's amazing to me that with all this and as educated as we are now and now that we understand as a people that this is not a good thing, do you know Buck v. Bell has never been explicitly overturned? While forced sterilization laws have largely fallen out of favor, their echoes persist. As recently as the 21st century, reports of forced sterilizations have emerged, particularly in prisons and immigrant detention centers. Buck v. Bell forces us to grapple with some tough questions, like, how do we ensure that science serves humanity and not the other way around? How do we protect individual rights from being trampled by the state? And from an ethical perspective, This case exposes the dangers of using science to justify prejudice and discrimination. The eugenics movement cloaked its horrific practices in the guise of progress, and society bought into it. Illegally, Buck v. Bell demonstrates how the judiciary can fail marginalized individuals when it prioritizes ideology over justice. Cases like this remind us of the importance of constant vigilance in protecting human rights. Now, while we can't undo the past, we can learn from it. Advocacy groups today are working tirelessly to address the injustices rooted in eugenics-era policies. States like Virginia have issued formal apologies for their sterilization programs, and even reparations have been offered to some survivors. It's also important to recognize the ongoing battles for reproductive justice and disability rights. Modern issues like access to health care and protections against discrimination are deeply connected to the lessons of Buck v. Bell. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we can educate ourselves and others about this history. We can support organizations that fight for reproductive and disability rights. We can demand accountability from our institutions. Buck v. Bell is a sobering reminder of the dangers of pseudoscience, prejudice, and unchecked power. But it's also a call to action for a more just and equitable future. And I wanted to bring this up. I read a book that talked about this very well, and the book is called Imbeciles: The Supreme Court, American Eugenics, and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck, and it's written by Adam Cohen. And I really want you to check that book out because it is really, really good. It goes into a lot of detail, not only about Carrie's case, but just what was going on during the time with this whole eugenics idea. And gives you a lot of background on that, but it also tells you a little bit about what happened to Carrie later. Now, immediately after the Supreme Court's decision, she was taken back to Virginia and was sterilized. And she had a very hard life after that. And before she died, I want to say Time magazine, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Some magazine had done an interview with her. And she said in that interview, she said, I always wanted to have more kids because she didn't have a chance to know Vivian. Vivian was actually adopted by the Dobbs family. Yeah, by Carrie's family that, foster family that didn't want her anymore, but they took the baby in and raised the baby until she passed away, and she passed away at a very young age. And Carrie was not made aware of this until years later. One of the things in the Supreme Court case, the lawyers kept saying that once she's sterilized, she can go back and live with the Dobbs family and be there with her child. They can be together, with the Dobbses. But the Dobbses didn't want her. They wouldn't allow her to move back in with them. So she didn't get those last few years of Vivian's life. So, it's just that family, the Dobbs family. Oh, you just want to choke them when you read, especially reading that book, or listening to it as I did on Audible. But it's just sad, that she died not able to have any more children, never being able to know her own daughter that she did have, and just with that whole reputation of what this case said about her. But everyone who even knew her later in life said the same thing. She was not feeble-minded. She was very intelligent. She was uneducated because she only had a 5th grade education. But she was not feeble-minded at all. She had no cognitive disabilities at all whatsoever. And another horrible thing was her sister, Doris, another one of Emma's children, had also been sterilized shortly after this happened with Carrie. Remember, I think she was the next one to be sterilized after Carrie. And she was never told what happened. And years later, she's married, and her husband were never able to have children. And so later in life, when she's elderly, they're talking. I can't remember, something had happened, and they went back to the hospital to talk about some things there, and the doctor there had told them that she had been sterilized, and she said, "Wait, what?" She said, "That's not what I was told." He said, "Well, you remember you had the operation here?" She said, "No." She said, "They told me I was having an appendectomy, so they had to remove my appendix." And she showed them the scar. The doctor, she showed the doctor there her scar. I said, "That's my scar from my appendectomy." And he had to break it to her that no, she had been sterilized at that time. And her husband just held each other and cried because they had tried so hard to have a child, and they thought there was something wrong with one of them. That one of them just wasn't able to have children. And the whole time it was because of that. She had never been told, she had never been asked for her consent, of course, because the law didn't force them to do that. She didn't have to be told what they were doing, and she didn't have to give consent. And that's the scariest thing about that. To me anyway, is that they can do something like that and you never even know that it had been done. So Carrie Buck, just a sad, sad case. And I hope we learn the lessons from that we need to, so that we never repeat that again in our country. And I worry about our country when I hear some of the things that are being said, especially about the LGBTQIA plus community. And also involving women's rights, reproductive rights. It's scary to me. And I just hope that we never return to anything like what we've discussed today. Well, that's going to do it for the show. So until next time, remember, you don't have to be religious to do the right thing. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you next time. And hopefully I'll be feeling better. Hopefully my voice wasn't too messed up today that you could actually understand what I'm saying. Anyway, take care of yourselves. We'll talk to you later.
This is an Okie Doke production.